feel okay where you are? You good? Step back for you. All right, we'll get started here. So that we're continuing Vector 2018. I am Dr. Landon. I'm the director of the EKU Gaming Institute, and we are very happy to have Wes Keltner from Gun Media with us here. And this is really exciting. Like, we're going to keep this again informal, casual, off the cuff, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Sound good? And yeah, we'll.
Is this on?
That doesn't. No. Okay.
What is it? Press the bottom.
Press the bottom.
Hold.
And hold.
Press and hold.
Is it red?
Now it's red. Yeah, it should work.
Try now.
Hello, hello. Hey.
Awesome.
If it didn't work, we don't have to get up here.
I'll just shout, right? No,
Okay.
it's a pleasure to be here. It's awesome. I love what you guys have been doing. As you're aware, I've come down a few times to try to help out with the EKU Gaming Institute where I can. I think it's great. I wish something like that had existed when I was in school, at least here. I'm born and bred here in Kentucky, and actually went to EKU my freshman year and then transferred to UK. And yeah, I wish there had been anything even remotely close to it, and neither university had anything like that. So kudos for putting that together.
So continuing with that, where are you from?
The bustling metropolis of Campbellsville. We got a super Walmart. Quit giggling. Like, which is about 80 miles southwest of here, so it's kind of right in the center of the state. Yeah, it's small town. Graduated high school in '97, and then again went to Eastern, and then transferred up to UK.
I guess
we already have a question.
What is a super Walmart?
Was back then there were back in the day in the 90s there were, at least in the small towns around, at least in Kentucky and probably other parts of the Midwest, you had just a Walmart, which was a very small Walmart. There was no grocery inside it. It was just right. He's like, what? Yeah. They were much smaller in size, and then they started building the bigger, giant ones with grocery stores, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a big deal in our town when we got that. Like, everyone would go there. It was 24 hours. The old one, no, it closed at like 9 o'clock. Right, so it's a big deal when you live in a small town.
it's crazy. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I apologize if that's my first question.
If that's the questions we get, though, I'm gold.
You're good.
Right?
You're good. Sure. Yeah. All right. So, when did you decide to go into the industry?
When I was in college, so this would have been, I don't know, 02 or 03 or something, I was really into, like most males in college, playing video games, obviously. But I was also into the journalism of people covering video games. And so there was a little opportunity on campus. There was a professor there, Nathan Stevens, who was he did like a lot of video work, and but had a little website on the side where basically to get free games, right? And he would cover video games and bring students in to cover video games. It was kind of like an internship at the same time, but you got to learn how to play a game and be a critic around a game, and he kind of taught you some of that stuff. And so I kind of went in under his wing and sort of learned the ropes that way, at least looking at things critically. Is where I first cut my teeth in that, and then transitioned more into some marketing with, like, there was brands like Unilever and Procter & Gamble that were trying to understand the video game demographic. You know, like, how do we sell more deodorant to teenagers or whatever? And they were looking at games but didn't understand them, or didn't understand how to communicate their product to them. And so we started doing some of that work where we would kind of come in and consult with them and discuss, like, the market and that demographic and what are they doing, how are they playing video games, and because this would have been a transition from like the original Xbox to 360, where the dashboard had more opportunities for ad placements, but then also what was going on in games. You know, around that time, the Tom Clancy series of titles started having like in-game ads. If you guys ever remember that, there was like Gillette and some stuff like that. So we were in with some of those conversations to help kind of direct that. But I did that for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years where I would help some brands. Like we put, does anyone remember Second Life? Yeah. Everybody, like Bone and Grow. So when I first discovered that, there was about 70,000 people in that world, but there wasn't any brands. And you're born in that world with just like a T-shirt and a pair of jeans. And if you wanted different clothing, you had to find people in the game that were like legit 3D like artists that could make clothing for you, and you buy it from them, right? And so instead, I thought, man, there should be like a real brand in here, like with some like cool like Nike gear maybe or whatever, right? Like if you want to be your own digital self in this world, like I want to wear the clothes that I would normally wear. And at that time, I was kind of into American Apparel as a company and as their product line. I thought it was pretty cool. And so I flew out to LA and met with their head of marketing and was like, hey, there's this thing called Second Life. I like it. Brought this like POS laptop that was like barely running it, you know, and it's like, this is this thing and it's really cool and people like it and it's gonna grow and be big. And he's like, okay. I was like, we should build an American Apparel store in here and you can come in and buy clothing and like, you know, make your digital self look like your real self and this and that. And he was like, cool, let's do it. How much? And I was like, I totally didn't think he was gonna bite, right? So I was totally ill prepared for the part where they're like, how much? And I was like, And so basically, it was like, how much you got, you know? Right. And he threw some number out. And at this point, I was still a senior in college, so it was more money than I'd ever heard like in my life, which now is like it's small in the world of making video games. But at the time, I was like, holy moly! I'm like, yeah, that'll do it. And so we rounded up a couple of folks, and we built this American Apparel store in Second Life. And and it got on the front page of like Ad Age and the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. And so, my that sort of career took off, and I had fun with that, like helping brands and thinking of different ways to introduce brands with gaming, but not do it in a way that's like in your face, a little way that's a little more organic and feels right. But I got kind of bored with that, and we were getting some calls from publishers that were like, hey, can you just help us make our games a little better, play them and discuss like metagame or discuss whatever. And so we did that for like 5 years. So I put together a team of some ex-journalists that had, written at, like we got Dan Hsu on board, who was kind of well known through EGM, and Damian Lynn was there, Kristen Reed, Joe Rybicki, who was the editor-in-chief of PlayStation Magazine. So we started putting together these guys, and we would just travel around to studios, and we would play either really, really early, what would be considered like gray box pre-alpha, like early stuff, all the way up to it's time for this game to almost launch, and we want to know how is the press going to receive this. So we'd write like a mock review for it. Like we played it for about a week in their studio, and then write an in-depth article on like, this is what we think of the game. And they would make their decisions sometimes based on that, where some things would either get removed or they would say, it's fine, we're good with that score, so let's just do it. So again, we did that for about 4 or 5 years, and then I kind of got tired of helping other people make their games, and I wanted to make my own game. So I raised a couple dollars and ventured into the world of mobile. It's hard. It's very, very hard. At that time, that was, I guess, 2008 or 9 or something like that. So the mobile market was really picking up, and there was a lot of games. Today it's too daunting. Like I would never want to venture back into that world. There's just too much noise there. Plus, I'm not a big fan of free-to-play, just from a mechanic standpoint, like what you have to put into your game to ask people for money. So we launched a premium title in the middle of like the giant Nexons and all these companies that were making like, free-to-play titles on mobile that were making, it made $1 million a day or whatever. You're like, oh my God, like we were nowhere near that. But our game was called Breach and Clear. It was a strategy game on mobile for iPad, iPhone, and Google Android Store. It did pretty well. We had 1.7 million downloads for a premium mobile title, which isn't bad. But we handle all the concept and the design, the production direction. What we don't do at Gun is develop. We don't write code. We don't do animation, we don't do artwork, that kind of thing. So yeah, so it wasn't a major transition from where we were before, which was sort of understanding marketing, understanding branding, understanding demographic of that, but then also understanding what makes a game fun. How do you highlight like pillars of a game to make unique selling points? How can features like systemically work together? So on and so forth. So we kind of put together this war chest of knowledge, and we just applied it to let's make our own stuff.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that came to be.
Okay. I guess with Friday the 13th, the game, you probably learned more than a couple things from that, the whole process, right?
Like only learned 3 things actually. So.
I guess is there anything that as students or maybe prospective developers, things that you could share with us that we could learn from that experience to maybe not run into similar issues, or things that went awesome that we should all do the same way?
Right. Build to the most recent version of the engine that you choose to use, be it Unity or Unreal or whatever. Try to get the most recent one, and that's when you start, and then stay on top of, if a new update comes out, roll your code over to that. We didn't have that luxury. We were pushing content as fast and as hard as we could because we honestly did not think that the game would sell as fast and be as big as it was. We started out as a little indie title. It was called Summer Camp, and it was more of a just homage to Friday the 13th. We had almost no budget, like under $1 million. And we were just going to, let's make some, because we didn't even think, does the market want asymmetrical horror in a multiplayer? We hadn't really seen it, right? There wasn't anything on the market that was the way of which we had concepted this game out. We didn't see it. So it was almost like a prototype and let's test this to see if people want it, right? And we talked to a couple of publishers, and they're like, no. So we were like, well, we're on our own, so let's just start. So we started, and I put together some of the folks that are well-known in the quote-unquote horror scene. So I reached out to Tom Savini, who is, I see a couple of nods in the room from people who follow horror, who know who he is, but he's well-known for practical effects, but then also he bridged the gap and became an actor as well, and he's been in a lot of films. From Dusk Till Dawn is probably his most well-known and memorable character. His character's name was Sex Machine. I'll spare you the details, but watch the movie. It's a good movie. Tarantino, it's great. So we brought him on to help design kills, and again, we were just this little small, tiny game and called Summer Camp, and so I didn't have a lot to offer him, but he liked the vision. He liked where we were going with it. So he's like, yeah, sure, I'm in. I'm like, cool. Well, it would be nice if we had like a name for the killer. Again, we were just called Summer Camp. I was like, I'd love to get Kane Hodder, who played Jason in Friday the 13th. I'd love to get him in a motion capture suit and have him be our killer. It's a killer that horror fans know and recognize, so we should do that. And Tom Savini's like, I know him. I'll text him, right? So a few days later, I get an email, and it's, hey, it's Kane, and I'm like, don't kill me, through the email. And he's like, yeah, no, this sounds cool. Tom says you guys know what you're doing. I'm in. If you get a full budget together and you want to make this full title, I would love to do it. And boy, it would be rad if you guys got the Friday license. I'm like, yeah, but that's not happening, right? We're just tiny guys out of Kentucky, right? And he's like, hey, by the way, I bumped into Harry Manfredini, who was the composer from the films Friday the 13th, and I was telling him about what you're making and what Tom and I are doing, and he was like, he wants to join in. So do you need music? And I'm like,
Right.
Yeah, that's the exact music we want. So yes. So I kind of had the band back together, if you want to look at it that way. And we just started building, and we got to a rapid prototype, had some screenshots and some did some a beauty corner somewhere where we could do some nice screenshots to send out to the press. We sent to IGN and several others. And since we had cut our teeth in this industry on some of the journalism side, as well as like a lot of journalists, like someone would leave like Game Informer and be in between a job to go work somewhere else. They'd come work for us and like pick up a couple of mock reviews or something to like kind of keep them fed. And then they would go become, the second in charge at IGN or something. So we kind of had a dope black book, right? When it was like time to put our stuff out. So I'm like, hey, you remember that time whenever you were like on the couch and you were eating ramen and I hooked you up with a job, like run these screenshots, please, and that helped us out a lot. But we ran the screens on IGN Game Informer. Everyone ran our summer camp images and the announcement that Kane Hodder's on board and Tom Savini's, all these people, and everyone was like, we want this game, and I was like, oh great, like everybody wants this. This is cool. So a few months go by, my phone rings, and it's Sean S. Cunningham, who's the original director of Friday the 13th films and the owner of the IP, or at least the owner of portions of the IP. We'll get in the weeds if we talk about IP law and all this other stuff. So anyway, he calls and is like, hey, love what you're doing. Bumped into Manfredini at a horror conference, and he told me to check your game out. I'm looking at it on IGN. It looks awesome. I'm like, the whole time I'm thinking, I'm about to get sued. This guy's, he's baiting me, and then he's going to be like, by the way, here's my lawyer. Like that's what I was waiting to happen. Not even close to that. He was super chill, great guy. He was like, hey, so you got all these, you got my guys kind of together. You're making this homage that's, obviously a nod towards Friday the 13th. Would you like to have the license? And I'm like, yeah, but we don't have any money. Licensing fees with Hollywood IP it's ridiculous money, right? And I'm like, we don't have it. And he's like, oh no, I'll give it to you, no charge, like free. He said, just cut me in on the back end. And I'm like, okay. That's great. And so like we all sat around as a team and we're like, hyperventilating and so then we knew we needed to make this big announcement. We were going to unveil it at E3 that summer camp is actually Friday the 13th. But it was like 3 months we had to set on this news, so it was like killing us because we'd bump into friends who were like, "What are you working on?" I'm like, "This little game. It's summer camp. It's So we were really excited when we finally got to announce at E3. Everyone seemed to enjoy it. We instantly started a Kickstarter because we knew we needed more money because the game was going to be bigger now. It had more expectations from fans. So we had, it was a daunting task of how do you bring one of the most iconic, slashers, how do you bring that from where it was in 1987 on the NES, which some love and some hate, and depends on, it wasn't my favorite game, that's for sure. But how do you take, that's where that was, like 30-something years ago, and how do you meet the appetite of a player base in a community that's what they remembered, but they wish it was something else. And there's so many fans that come to us and say, I've wanted this game, right, for 10 plus, 20 plus, whatever years, and all of them had their own like little design in their ideas, right? Like some guy, I have this notebook from when I was like 12, right, where I like scribbled down like if I made a Friday the 13th game, this is what it'd be. I'm like, yeah, we're kind of the same, right? Like that's kind of what happened, right? So it was just kind of a crazy series of events. The stars lined up, and so we had a successful Kickstarter. We raised nearly, it's like $1.2 million or something. I don't remember the dollar amount like when we were finished. But yeah, Kickstarter takes like 30%, by the way, in case anybody. You don't get all your money. Like you have to wait for a long time, and it sucks. So because you want to let's take the money and build awesome stuff, and you have to wait. So anyone's considering a Kickstarter, just know that. And it's also like a full-time job to manage a Kickstarter.
So take what you want, times it by 0.3.
Yeah, try to give yourself a cushion if you can. That's the genesis of getting to Friday the 13th. Now, lessons learned from Friday the 13th. As I mentioned, the engine thing, that's a good one to keep in mind. Don't build a game until you have all the money required to build said game. It's very difficult to have a proper milestone calendar put together and hit all those milestones and be able to deliver a title if you don't have the dollar amount that's required to pay for all of that. We suffered from it because once we had the license, I thought publishers are going to just eat this up. They're going to love it. Like, it's a huge name. We're not going to have any problem getting the rest of our money. So I met with all of them. None of them wanted it.
Really?
They were like, oh, no, IP, like games that are based on films, they suck. And that's a hard thing to argue because, I mean, you're right. On one hand, you can probably count pretty, like the Riddick series was pretty dope. Like, what's that? Yeah, it was. But, right, right. So it's difficult to argue that point whenever that's where that. And the others just said, oh, you know, we don't know that the market or gamers really want asymmetrical horror this way, or we've never published a game like this, so we wouldn't know how to do it. So good luck, kind of a thing. So yeah, it was left up to us to, you know, figure that out.
Wow.
And so we had to continue raising money, and it's hard to get all that in one big tranche. You have to kind of take steps to raise the kind of money that was required to get a game out. So it was a lot of hurry up and wait, and then, right, like you get some money and you burn through a few sprints, and then you run out, and then you do it again. So that I would not recommend doing that. Like set your budget, set your milestones, know how much money it requires to do that. It doesn't hurt to get to a prototype at least first, so you can play some of your theories and some of your ideas, but then try to secure as much funding to get you all the way to the finish line, and then add another like 30 or 40% because you're going to go over. Like, it's going to happen. So those were two big pain points for us. Yeah. And don't overlook metagame. It's an important part of like shelf life of your game is to have a deep metagame. We were probably 75% through the game before we were like, wait a minute, like we need, like through development, before we were like, oh, we need to have a good metagame in this to keep people hooked.
Can you explain a little bit about, like, go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So we concentrated a lot of our efforts. We knew from the start, like, okay, playing as Jason is going to be awesome because it's Jason. It's a power trip, right? Like, you get to take on this role and be this ultimate slasher, and that's going to be fun and brutal, and that's good, check mark, right? Like, because we saw early some of the data we got back from the motion capture studio of Jason, and we applied it to like our early rig and got to see some of it, and we're like, yep, like that's good. But it's random who's chosen as Jason in a match. So you've got 7 other players that are going to be counselors. So the odds are you're going to be a counselor most of the time, unless you get the luck of the draw, right? So we knew counselor gameplay had to be super fun because that's what you're going to be doing the majority of the time. So we just went heads down on that and just spent a tremendous amount of time making sure that if you're running around as a counselor, that it's fun, that if you go toe-to-toe with Jason, there's a chance you might be able to get away from that. That it's not like just instant kill whenever Jason comes up. There's a lot of balance that happens in a game that's supposed to be not balanced, right, which is a whole other discussion. But that led to, okay, we've got this feels right. Now we need a good meta game. So we need, what is it you're leveling up towards, and what are the awards for that? And what do you have some perks? Do you have like things that you can earn and achieve to progress the character, but not so far that it breaks balance, right? Like that's a difficult thing to do, and you need to do all that stuff early, right? And I wish we had the foresight to do that. Sometimes again, it was out of necessity of just we need to get this stuff done and push forward with making sure this element is fun. But yeah, that would be another one I would give is don't let your metagame like be a second thought, like really concentrate on it. Yeah.
Awesome. What?
So I guess speaking of metagame a little bit, I have two questions. The first one, what would be the whole process I've seen, never actually played Friday the 13th, I've seen a lot of people playing it, and it seems like killing Jason is the hardest thing to do ever. And I just wondered what the thought process too for making some of the obstacles for the players are that, like putting the car back together and such, and getting gas for the boat and all that, and how you took that into effect with the fact that Jason can apparently teleport between players. And that relates to my second question of, did everyone just decide to pull a prank on the owner of the car by removing the battery and siphoning its gas?
Yeah, right. Like why there's a potential you could be in a campground that has two cars. It can happen. It's kind of random. It's either one car in a boat or two cars can happen. Why are all the parts like missing from it's a game, right? Like we have to create some form of some loops in there and things for you to do, because if you just run up and the car is ready to go, turn the key and take off, that's not fun. It's more fun to because there's that everything we did was sort of like if you take a rubber band and you put one side of the rubber band on one finger, one on the other, and you stretch it out like this. If this is the counselor and this is Jason, right, and these two fingers, like you constantly have to be thinking about and that's where you create like the tension, right? In a multiplayer title like this, is he needs to be able to get close to you, but then you need to be able to get away a little bit, right? So every element of the game, from one cabin to the next cabin, balances back towards the stamina pool of our counselors, like how much stamina they have, how fast they can run. So everything gets balanced to that, so that the distance between cabins creates that rubber banding sort of feeling where it's like, oh, I'm getting away. Oh no, he's catching up to me. Because that's very much how the films work. Is there's a near miss and then they get away and they're like, oh God, I made it, and then jump scare, Jason steps out, kills them. We were trying to replicate that like in game, and so having multiple things that you need to find to then put on the car can create natural choke points in the level, because we wanted our game to be big, like a slasher sandbox, right? Like you can go anywhere, you can kind of run in any direction and do whatever you want to do, but if you get focused on an objective, like I've got to find the battery and bring the battery back to the car. Well, now the Jason player knows, okay, people are going to be gravitating towards this car, so we give him some traps to set around the car, and then he can venture off and try to get someone. When someone steps in a trap, he gets an alert and knows, comes back to the car, chaos ensues, right? The game's not fun if you never run into Jason, right? If you're just wandering around as a counselor, that's not fun, right? It's having those interactions, but then you need near misses within the interactions. And that's where people get most excited and have the most fun with the game. So yeah, cars don't have parts in them on purpose.
I would believe it. I'm just asking. It was mainly, the second question was mainly a joke.
Right.
Like to be like, oh, they're pulling a prank.
Sure.
I could believe that because they're relatively young people.
Right.
Either that or theft prevention.
Right. So yeah, there's a point to that, and every feature and every mechanic that is in the game all has to go back towards how do you balance a game that's supposed to be unbalanced. When you have Jason as this unstoppable killing force, how do you make a game where he doesn't just spawn in, kill everyone, and the match is over in 40 seconds? That's not fun at all. So you got to create the tension. You got to give the near misses. You got to make those moments, those cinematic moments happen.
One second, Austin. So I guess with that, the design, did you have balance set pretty early, or was that changing?
Oh,
it
changed. It's still changing. Like it's a breathing element of the game that we're constantly have our finger on. You have to make subtle changes once your game is live. When you're pre-launch, you can really crank the dial and feel that on opposite sides. But once your game's live, don't do that, because your players get used to one way, and then if you radically change it, they get upset. So you have to make more subtle changes, and then it's a cascading effect. Like when you just turn one dial, just one little tick, there's going to be a cascade to that's felt throughout the entire game. So sometimes it throws off pacing, sometimes it throws off, like if you have elements of the game that balance towards metagame, then it can throw those elements off. So, yeah, like we have to do things in a very subtle fashion. Your player base wants it now. They feel a pain point in something, and they're like, "Give this to me right now." If you gave that to that one person, they actually more often than not didn't really want that, right? They wanted more of a subtle change, and then the rest of the folks too will be like, "Oh, well, I play it this other way, and now I don't like this," or "I play as this specific character, and since you made that one little adjustment, this happened." You know, and unfavorably so towards that player. So, yeah, balance is always a concern, always something that we played with from the beginning of the title. And again, as I alluded to, a lot of it comes back to, which in most games, if you're playing from a car to a person, a war game, a shooter, whatever, you know, speed and movement is it's like everything, right? For especially in multiplayer. It's the one thing you have to be really careful with what you're adjusting. But that was a big element of the game is you don't want a player to be so fast that they outrun Jason and then they never have conflict, right? But you don't want to be so slow that Jason easy picks them off and then it's over. You know, that player doesn't have fun.
Right.
So trying to make those balances to just that one element of speed and stamina. How far can they run? How fast can they run? Just those two things you're constantly babysitting and tweaking to get it to feel right.
I guess let me ask, I'll ask one more and then we'll jump to the audience. You know, with existing IP, you kind of inherit a fan base, possibly.
Yeah.
Can you talk about maybe that brings maybe a different set of issues, maybe difficulties, different considerations, right, compared to creating your own IP?
Yeah.
Could you talk about that just a little bit?
Sure. I mean, there is the bonus of a built-in fan base that you can bet that they're going to pick up the title because they love the IP so much. We got a lot of players that this is the first time they played a game in like 15 plus years, right? Like they abandoned video games a long time ago. They're still big horror fans. You know, they're dads that have 12-year-old kids at this point, right? Teenage kids, and they buy the game and play with their kids, right? Because they love that IP so much, and like one of the major facets of tackling this for us, one of our goals was it has to look and feel like the film. Fan service goes a long way, but we lost a lot of sleep on making sure that if you see it in the game, from the carpet on the ground to the lamp that's in Higgins Haven House, it's in the movie. Like we studied it frame by frame, painstakingly so, to the point of like our 3D artists were cross-eyed at the end of this, right? Because they were constantly, pausing and queuing up scenes and being like, oh, the wallpaper in this room should look like this because there it is, in part 3 or whatever. So anyway, but when you do that, you're creating brand ambassadors within the hardcore horror community, right? Because they know all those pieces, they know those elements, they know exactly what part 4 Jason looks like. They know what the mask from part 3 looks like, every little scratch, right? The chevron, the holes in it, right? They know it to into detail, right? And so when we display something and show it, those people will look at it and go, yeah, that's right. Like they did that right. And so then everyone sort of under that looks to those folks, be it on forums or Twitter or anything else, that they're aficionados of the franchise, and they go, well, if he says it's right, it's got to be right, right? So you're creating a community that appreciates the attention to detail. But at the same time, there's the other side of that coin, right? You do something wrong, right? You're going to hear it. You're going to hear it instantly. And like we had Kane Hodder play Jason, which Kane Hodder was Jason in 7, 8, 9, and 10 in the films. But we wanted to have part 2 Jason, part 3 Jason, part 4, part 5, part 6, all played by different actors in the films. We only had one actor, so we only have one Jason model, and it's modeled from the dimensions of Kane Hodder, right? Who's, you know, like 6'2" and big dude. He's got big traps. He's a big guy, right? Well, like Jason Part 2, not really that big. Jason 3 was big, but it was like stockier up top. And Kane is taller and sort of built differently. So when you have all these, CJ was from Part 6, completely different sort of build. But that created an issue for us, right? Is like, well, we want these to look just like they did in the movie, but Kane doesn't look like all the Jasons. And trying to make changes to anyone here who's done 3D character art, like when you start messing with the rig and textures breaking and stuff clipping through, and sometimes just shoulders drop down, weird stuff starts happening when you like mess with the mojo, right? And so we have a lot of fans that are like, that's not what Part 6 Jason looks like. We're like, I know, but I'd have to go like get the guy that played Jason in that movie, get him in a motion capture suit, spend 3 weeks in the motion capture studio and record 300 plus animations. Like, no, that's a lot of money, just because. So you get that side of it too. Is it's great to have see the passion and have the attached audience that appreciates the work that we do, but then they also, whenever you have to either shortcut something or it's not precisely the way it was, they're going to tell you first and foremost, like, that's not right.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Look, Nick.
Was it hardest curveball you got, like post-launch, do you think? Like something that hit you in the face that you just weren't expecting?
Yeah, 125,000 players in 40 seconds. When we were prepared for 10,000, our servers and database just physically melted. So we immediately started scrambling to get AWS, Amazon, to start spinning up more servers for us around the world. That's just for matchmaking, but then also the database. And as in a perfect world, you spin up a lobby, and on one server you may be able to have like 4 lobbies or something going of players, and then as those lobbies close off, then you start to shut off a server and not migration like host migration, but like servers spin down and spin up when you need them on demand, right? Like that's in an ideal world, but some comma or zero or something was like oopsed at some point. So we started spinning up all these servers, and they were never turning back off. They were sitting empty, right? And if you leave servers spinning for that long, and Amazon just starts to turn some things off. And sometimes they would turn some things off that had people in them. And you're like, wait, no. So we had all these occurrences that were spinning up all around the globe, and it's wasting money and resources, and oops. So we had to quickly start getting network guys to write scripts to be able to properly turn things on and off and spin them up on demand when we need them. Our first 3 months after launch was like the worst experience of my life. And it should be the happiest. You should be like, we did it, finish line, and people are playing our game, and it's great. But the technical issues that we were hit with, it just floored us. We were toast. I mean, sleeping in the offices and trying to figure out, why does this keep happening? Like Xbox players just dying, like games just crashing. Some people couldn't even get through the menus. The game was crashing. So we had memory leaks. There's a lot of problems that just happened that worked great whenever your target audience is, because we did a beta and we looked at sales and we were like, okay, we think we're going to move this many units in this kind of time. We can expect concurrence of about this. And I even said, okay, well, triple that, just so we're safe. And everybody's like, okay, Wes. And so we, everybody, gets everything ready, and then no. I mean, our opening weekend, we, in terms of like revenue, made in our opening weekend what we thought it would take 18 months to make. In terms of sales, and then also concurrence, right? I knew that Friday the 13th was a powerful IP. I knew that people liked, Jason. But when I looked at beta and pre-order numbers, I thought, we're going to need to grow a little bit, right? We're going to need to get this out. We're going to need people to see it on Twitch maybe for a little while, and it's going to be a slow curve towards growth. No, not at all. Like, first 3 months we were 7 days a week, 150,000 concurrent. Every single second of any day, there was that many people on it playing it. We just couldn't keep up. We were dying. So yeah, that was a big lesson learned. Have dedicated servers if you're going to be a multiplayer title. I highly recommend it. It is more work. It can actually be more cost effective in the long run if you build them properly and have them turn on and off on demand and where you need them. You need a good network person to help put that together. Unless you know for a fact that your game is super tiny, you're not going to go to like multi-platform, maybe just testing something, early access Steam, you can probably get away with more peer-to-peer type of connections. But if you're going multi-launch, 3 platforms, you want to go big with it, look at dedicated. It's really gonna help. And there's some great services out there. Amazon's got Game Lift, which is a new service that they offer through Amazon stuff. It's awesome. It helps cut a lot of corners in terms of they kind of did the work for you. You just kind of implement it into your matchmaking and whatnot. Yes.
When you started making Summer Camp, did you have it in the back of your mind, like it would be cool to get the IP for Friday the 13th, or was that used in any kind of marketing?
I mean, yeah, we all thought, man, this would be cool. And I wish I could say like that I was so good at this that I knew it was going to happen. Like I wish I could say like my plan worked perfectly. Like no, like I didn't ever think I would get that call. I honestly thought we would build this game. It would be small. We put it out. We'd get a little bit of traffic, people talking about it, and then it would be easier for us to have a conversation with someone like Friday or someone like Nightmare on Elm Street or whomever it was that. But I was thinking this will be 3 years down the road before we get to do that, not 3 months after we say, hey, look at these pictures. So yeah, we were not definitely not expecting that, but we're always sort of, man, that would be really cool if we got that opportunity. Sure.
So, exactly how many times did you watch the movies while making it?
It was on every single day for like the 3 years of us working on it. One of them would be on at all times. But it wasn't like watching an entirety. It would be more like something would come up and they would ask like, hey, we're working on Packanack Lodge, which is from part 2. What kind of curtains were in there? So you could put the movie in and scrub to that spot, pause it, and then pull some screenshots from that, try to find textures that match, and so on and so forth. So watching it in its entirety, I've seen all. I don't like the reboot one. Just on a personal, like 2009 one, I didn't care for it. Freddy vs. Jason, I didn't care for it. It's okay. There's some pretty good kills in it, but just as a film, I didn't care for it. But like 2, 3, 6, 7, those were on repeat a lot around the office. Always somebody looking at them to reference something. So it's different when you're looking at it to reference and you're not looking at it for entertainment. But yeah, I love Friday the 13th. I'm sick of watching Friday the 13th. Other questions? Sure.
It seems that like the way that you penetrated into the gaming industry is through entrepreneurship as opposed to like getting a regular job, which actually like just looking at the job market, it seems it's more likely for this generation of game developers to go through entrepreneurship. And earlier in your talk, you talked about raising a few dollars. Do you have any advice for someone that would want to, I guess, follow in your footsteps, kind of, and like making your own stuff as like independent?
Sure. Sort of set your dreams and set your goal and your dream and your vision of what you want to do pretty high, but then keep like your budget in check. And then if you're going to ask someone for money, be very conservative in what you're promising them in terms of a return on their investment, because that's how an individual investor is going to look at it. They may say, I believe in your game, I'm going to give you $50,000, right? That, don't promise them, I'm making the next Fortnite, right? Like, don't be that person, because they see through it immediately and they're going to write you off immediately. It's better to come at them with the truth of, I'm working towards a prototype, or I'm working towards first playable, or I've already got first playable, take a look at it, and I want to take it to this stage. That's a better approach to investors. I'm hoping that it becomes easier in this state to raise money for games. I wish there were like 4 or 5 or 6 stories similar to mine of companies here, because then the investment community would be much more open and be less conservative about investing. The good news is, in the circles of investors that I meet with and talk to, they're younger and younger each year. When I first started out, I'd walk into a room and there would be 30 investors, and like the average age in the room was deceased. Right? So trying to pitch to someone that was like, my grandkids play video games, and you're like, okay, and they're like, I remember Pong or whatever, and you're like, there's been some advancements, right? And it's difficult. It's a difficult one to sell, right? Is to get that person excited about it. But luckily, the investment community in Lexington and in Louisville, there's younger people. When I say younger, people in their 30s and 40s that have the type of net worth that they can invest in opportunities like this, because they still play games, or they understand that market. They understand what could happen in terms of a return if you have a hit on your hands. And some of them just want to be, it's sort of, Hollywood has a similar thing where people put their money into movies just because they want to say that they're affiliated with some movie. Like they want to show up at the premiere or whatever pretentious thing. That's kind of a thing too for some investors, is they just want to be like, hey, make me the executive producer in the credits of the game, and we're good. Some are like that. So it really depends on who it is you're sitting down and talking to, the group that you're talking to. Are you looking for grant, or are you looking for straight up, investment from them? Are you giving them a royalty in the game, or do they have equity in your company if you started a company? So there's different routes to take, different people that you talk to, but I highly, everyone I meet that's a young independent developer, that's what I try to push them to do, is don't talk to publishers. And that doesn't help me any, because I'm kind of a publisher, sort of. But I only publish stuff that I think's like really rad. Like if I go to PAX and I'm in the Indie Mega booth and I'm like, that game's dope, I'll talk to the guy and be like, do you need some money? Because I think this is really cool. But we are traditionally like concept design. So we sit and write our own design on the game, and then we find the right team to match like what it is we're trying to do. But that's what I would push you to do, is if you need money to finish, surround yourself with people that can help you get as close as you can to a playable, so that you can show something, right? Because that's going to help an investor understand the vision of what it is that you're doing, and then keep it in check, the promise of the return, right? And most are, if you can hit a 2 or 3x what it costs them to put in it, if that's what they think they can get back, they're into that. That's a pretty solid return for most of them. Some would be fine with just a break even. I put 50 in, you launch the game, 2 years later, I got my 50 back. Okay, cool. I got to work on a game, even though they just gave you money. If that makes sense. Other questions?
Maybe the last one. Yeah. Go ahead.
Have you considered making more games for killers in Hollywood, or are you wanting to differentiate to a different kind of genre?
Right. No, we have. We've met with different IP, different Hollywood IP, to see like what's a good fit and what we like to do next. We're pretty good at horror, and we have a deep appreciation for horror in the 80s and 90s. So we would like to stick to that and keep making games like that, because also we think it's a niche that's kind of underserved, and one of the most powerful, most of you guys would agree, when you play video games, for the most part, there's an emotional connection, right, that you have. When you try to explain playing a game to someone who doesn't play games, they don't get it, right? Like this, and when you try to explain like No, The Last of Us is amazing, right? When you try to explain that to someone that like the last game they played was Mario 3, you're like, no, Mario 3 was great, but it's not this, right? And when you try to explain that emotion, it's difficult. And one of the most powerful ones is nostalgia, right? Because we all think back to, you forget the parts of your youth that kind of sucked, and you remember the things that were awesome. It's part of how humans are built, right? Is you forget the bad stuff and you remember the good stuff. And that's what the power of nostalgia can do, is remind someone of, I remember that movie, or I remember how I was in that movie. Like, so we had a lot of people saying, oh man, my older brother, he rented Jason Part 7, and that was the first one I saw. I snuck into his room when he was watching it with his buddies. He didn't know I was there, and I saw it, and it was so scary. And those kind of moments, they remember that. It's like burnt into your DNA. So when you get to play with that palette, that's what you're painting from, is nostalgia, it's incredibly powerful. And it resonates with people. And some even forgive that some things can be broken, or you may have a bug or two, or whatever issues that are in the title, because they still have those moments when they see with Friday the 13th, when they see Jason bust through a door and they're like, oh my God, and they scream and have a good time. That instantly takes them back to, they remember pulling the covers over their eyes. Even though they're not scared playing our game, they remember being scared, and that's powerful.
Awesome. Okay. I guess we'll do one more. Okay, Austin.
Mine's a joke, so it'll be.
Okay. Johnny, did you already ask one? Go ahead.
Me?
I mean, mine.
You can both go. We got a minute. At the same time. No, I say Johnny and then James.
When you were developing Friday the 13th game, did the possibility of actually adding a single-player campaign, something that would retell the story of Jason Voorhees and his mother and the tragic events that followed in his wake, did it ever occur that there was a possibility that you all could do that?
Yeah, so when we first set out to make the game from early design, it was multiplayer only. And then as we made the announcement and we saw comments in the community reaching out to us, they wanted single player. And some of that was because either they had not so great internet where they lived, or they didn't want to be, sometimes the ecosphere of multiplayer with microphones and headphones doesn't lead to the most friendly environments. Right. I'm trying to make that as PC as I can. People are jerks, right? And they say crappy stuff to each other. So some just don't want to do that. They just don't want that experience, but they still want to have an experience as Friday the 13th. So yeah, we started to lay out a plan for that. And so I sat down with Sean Cunningham, the director of the film, and we started talking about the canon and what would be smart and what would not be smart. And he actually made a really great point that sort of changed our direction of what we were doing. Because when we first discussed it internally without him, we were looking at that. We were looking at where are the holes in the canon, and where can we do things that's interesting and touch it, and what if we looked backwards, what if we looked so on and so forth. And he said, when we started making Friday the 13th, he said one of my biggest inspirations was Jaws. I was like, really? He's like, and that's how I view Jason, is he's Jaws but on land. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah. He goes, because hear me out. He goes, when you watch Jaws and people are on a boat, so they're stranded, right, out in the middle of the ocean, there's no help around. That's the camp. You're in the middle of the woods. There's nobody else around, right? When you're watching the film Jaws and you see they're on the orca boat, and Jaws comes up and snatches someone's arm off or whatever, he pulls someone in the morning, you don't think, I wonder what Jaws was like as a minnow. You don't think about it, right? You just go, yeah, that's because that's Jaws. He's a great white shark. That's what they do, is eat people, right? Like, you don't question before that, right? What's the storyline? How did he get here? Nobody cares, right? And that's where they set out with Jason, was he didn't necessarily need a big backstory. They touch on it, right? And they discuss, from the first one with Pamela, and then, with Jason coming back, did he die? Did he really drown? There's a whole weird thing in the canon with that. But they purposefully don't fill a lot of those gaps in because it adds a little more mystery to the character, but then also the more that you understand a character, can relate to a character, and know the backstory of the character, less scary they become. Because you start to identify, and you start to be like, well, yeah, he had a crappy childhood. No wonder he turned out the way he turned out, or so on and so forth, right? And you start making him human. And that wasn't the goal of Friday the 13th from 2 on, right? Here's an unstoppable killer. His mom was beheaded and he was drowned, maybe, due to some teens not paying attention to him because they were off doing teen things, right? And that is perpetually pissed him off, right? And anyone that shows up on his grounds, they're done. What's a similar thing? Like, hey, you're out swimming in the ocean. You asked for it. Jaws ate you, right? So,
All right. We'll probably,
are we good?
yeah, we're good.
Okay.
We're good. All
Well,
right.
thanks everyone for letting me come and ramble on.
Thank you, Wes.
Yep. And special thanks to Chris Charla for showing up. If you guys don't know who that person is and you make indie games, you better meet him. He's important. It matters that he's here. I'm serious. It matters that he's here, and I appreciate you coming for this.
Yeah, I'm stoked to be here.
If,
You just oversold us a little bit.
no. It's not true. He helped us out greatly with Friday because we're small, we're an indie team. When indie products go through the ID and Xbox program, it lands on his desk. He's got a great team. Tremendous help for Friday and helped us during horribly painful moments of development. So if you need to meet Chris if you haven't yet. All right, that's all I got. Thanks.